No one would expect a seemingly happy neighborhood to be the host of horror, but as these two stories show, what can at one time be a happy environment can quickly show a side today's protagonists never saw coming. A huge thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description, for allowing me to share these stories with all of you. Remember, you can send in your own stories to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, please be sure to like and comment. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I never thought we'd live in the suburbs, but there we were on Natural Trail Road in Columbus, Georgia, lost in a sea of identical two-story houses, basketball goals, and smiling, happy families. I guess Jimmy and I weren't technically a family, not yet at least. But I was 4 months pregnant, and well, soon we'd be making that leap to Nature Trail parenthood. Like the final step to a suburban ritual, I felt having our baby boy would finally ingratiate Jimmy and Susan Dandridge with the neighbors. I felt like then we'd finally fit in. We moved here in December. We had ourselves a nice, modest home at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was our first house too. Both of us were in our late 20s, and we had nice TSA jobs at the airport. So yeah, Jimmy and I were basically set. My only real concern was the upcoming baby bump. So far I wasn't showing too bad, and I knew the yoga would help me lose weight later, but the extra pounds weren't gonna bother me too much. After all, I considered myself an attractive young black woman. My fun curly hair and pretty face could offset whatever horrors fat Susan would bring, and in the end, I knew it'd be worth it. Especially once we had our son. Like a power couple, my marriage with Jimmy was still going strong after all these years, and why not? Jimmy was handsome and kind. His green eyes and goofy smile had me hooked since our freshman year in college, and his recent workouts only had him looking even hotter. Plus, he was a big horror geek like me. I knew he was gonna be a great dad, and I was gonna do my damnedest to be a wonderful mother. But outside of being with each other, we didn't have anyone else. We were isolated here on Nature Trail Road. Yeah, I guess our neighbors were friendly, but that was it. And it was the kind of awkward friendliness you feel at parties you're forced to attend. There was nothing genuine, no chemistry. I don't know. Maybe the Nature Trail wives weren't gonna offer me membership to the mommy club until I gave birth. Normally I didn't mind Jimmy and I having our privacy, but still there was no sense of community here. Not the kind I was hoping for when we made this move to suburbia. And things were only worse now that I was on maternity leave from work. With Jimmy gone during the day, I was left alone and alienated, trapped in our suburban prison. Besides Netflix horror movies and yoga, there wasn't much I could do. Not like I could just call up the girls and party with my neighbors, you know? So during the afternoons, I started walking around Nature Trail Road. Of course, there was no actual nature trail anywhere, but the walks were still pretty, like an elaborate illusion. Our neighborhood was surrounded by a small forest. All well, we were just miles from the closest CVS. Soon I formed a bond with Nature Trail. Not with my neighbors, but just with the environment. These short walks became comforting therapy for my loneliness. The winter weather cool yet comfortable in the daytime, and I enjoyed seeing how all the nice homes and manicured lawns lined up like a miniature village. But the Sarandon's house caught my eye. I didn't know Ben and Debbie Sarandon, or their young son and daughter that well. They were just your average nuclear family, attractive and physically fit, name brand clothes. The whole family had black hair, except Debbie, who always kept her blonde highlights. But other than these superficial observations, I didn't talk to them much. Even Ben and Debbie's voices were lost in my memory banks, a byproduct of only ever hearing them say hey or how are you. But their 2-story brick house stayed with me. Unlike the other nature trail homes, the Sarandon house had a slightly bigger yard, like a private estate. The house itself was positioned farther back from the road, and ever since Jimmy and I moved here in December, the family was also known for having the most Christmas decorations in the neighborhood. In a fever dream, the Sarandons' yard was littered with Santa Claus and snowman figurines, glowing reindeer, plastic Christmas trees, fake icicles dangling from the roof and trees, huge blinking Christmas lights. Even a virtual Santa smiled from one of the house's windows. During my walks, I could see their towering Fraser through the living room window. By day, I could see its long green limbs waving at me. The Christmas tree eternally embalmed with a crisp freshness. And by night, the tree and its millions of ornaments shine like a glowing North Star. In December, I didn't mind the Sarandons' Christmas shrine. The sight certainly made my daily walks even prettier. But the only problem was it was now February 20th, and their Christmas decorations were still there. Every single one of them. Like we were forever in the heart of the holidays. The synchronized lights would still turn on every night. The hologram Santa would still smile at me, and the Christmas tree would still glow with life. Throughout January, Jimmy told me not to worry. He'd say his family kept their tree up till March sometimes. But I knew not many people kept the lights on, or kept their figurines up this late. I had a sinking feeling in my gut that something was wrong. On my walks, the Sarandons' Christmas fortress soon became a dreaded house of horrors. And worse was no one seemed to care. Everyone on Nature Trail acted so nonchalant about it. No one was concerned. Not even the police when I called them about doing a welfare check. I guess I should have begged them to. But I sounded crazy to the 911 dispatcher, and there wasn't much I could say because I had seen the Sarandons sometimes on my walks. But I hadn't talked to them, and they always kept their distance. I'd either see them through their windows or when they were outside by the front door. Ben and Debbie would wave, but that was it. The family never left their winter wonderland. I'd see their Toyota and SUV always parked at the front of the driveway, but I never saw their children. Finally, curiosity drove me over the edge. In a breakdown, I told Jimmy something wasn't right with the Sarandons. My conspiracy theories ranged from Ben and Debbie going crazy to imposters hiding out in the Sarandon house. Of course, Jimmy was amused and just wanted to blame my worries on pregnancy paranoia. But once Angry Susan knocked that phone out of his hands, Jimmy took me serious. I didn't interrupt his pro-football strategy game, unless I really meant business. "What do you want us to do then?" Jimmy asked me. And he had a point. Like an uncertain coach, I had no strategy. Just sheer curiosity and concern. And desperation. "Let's just go over there," I said. "What?" Jimmy scoffed. Fueled by unease, I squeezed his shoulder. "Please, Jimmy, we'll just knock on the door. That's it." "Well, what about the cops?" "They won't go," I yelled, my polite voice somehow getting deeper. "Please, Jimmy." I leaned in closer towards his conflicted face. "Please." We decided to go that Friday evening. Jimmy had the weekend off, and of course, by the time we left the house for our 5 o'clock stroll, the Sarandons' Christmas decorations were still well on display. Their vehicles still parked out front. Nature Trail felt quiet. I saw none of our neighbors. Most of their driveways were empty. I suppose everyone was out and about on Friday, or at least I hoped so. Each of us wearing hoodies and jeans, Jimmy and I walked hand in hand. Even in the daytime, the February breeze sent chills down our spines. We entered the Sarandons' yard. Down their driveway, we made the long march against their field of holiday cheer. The smiling Santas and snowmen watched us like happy gatekeepers. The Christmas lights weren't on, but they surrounded us like colorful flowers in a garden. All the while, the hologram Santa teased us from the window. Amidst my lingering dread, I couldn't help but wonder how this family paid the light bill. Jimmy looked at me uneasy. They don't have dogs, do they? No, I replied. My gaze focused on the front door. I could see a glorious wreath, all the pieces still crisp and oh so green. None of it had faded in the 7 weeks since December 25th. Just this Christmas crap. Together we got closer to the door. The Christmas tree looked even larger, more monolith than cheerful decoration. This up close, I now saw reindeer antlers sticking up out the top of the Toyota and SUV. Jimmy and I stopped at the front door, right in front of the gaudy wreath. Both of us were hesitant in the silence, scared even. Squeezing the blood from my hand, Jimmy faced me. You gonna do it? I confronted the doorbell. I took one deep breath, and then I reached toward it. Like the opening of a secret passageway, the door swung open with cryptic slowness. Immediately cold air hit us hard. Stunned, Jimmy and I looked on at the house's entryway. All the lights were on. Nutcrackers lined up down the hall as if they were ready to march. Fake snow scattered across the floor, forming a white carpet. Ho ho ho, Merry Christmas! A jolly voice bellowed within. A voice I knew could be no other than Old Saint Nick. Burl Ives's Holly Jolly Christmas then blared through the airwaves on what must have been humongous speakers. The holiday anthem rang all through the house. The sheer force of the beat as powerful as the February wind. Jimmy's concerned eyes faced me. Babe, let's just... Determined, I gripped his hand and led us inside. Come on. Our feet scrunched through the fake snow. The Nutcracker's painted eyes watched us, but I kept on going down the hallway, through the holiday soundscape. My sight stayed focused on a doorway up ahead. Debbie! I yelled. Ben? I got no reply. Nothing but the overpowering Christmas music. Babe, come on, Jimmy said. Just hold on, I replied. Debbie! Still nothing. I heard no one. Not a soul in that house. Shivering, I pulled my hoodie in tighter. The Sarandon house was somehow colder than outside, like Jimmy and I really were in the North Pole. Holly Jolly Christmas got louder the closer and closer we got. The snow even thicker. An air conditioning thermostat showed we were at a steady 50 degrees. No wonder my hand felt frozen to Jimmy's. Where are we going? Jimmy asked. Just let me check, I said. Clutching Jimmy's hand, I led us through the open doorway, right into the living room. The holiday music was now at its loudest peak, as was the holiday cheer. Jimmy and I came up to a horrified stop. There before us was a Christmas scene of terrifying proportions. Bright flames glowed in the fireplace. A tall nutcracker stood guard right beside it. The fire was too vivid and strong to even be real, but it sure wasn't a hologram, just endless. 4 large stockings hung over the fireplace, reindeer and Santa caricatures all over them. Like weights, presents, and goodies filled the stockings to the brim. More fake snow ran wild through this winter wonderland. White slush stuck to the ceiling like cobwebs. Beneath the glorious Christmas tree was a feast of wrapped Christmas presents. Ben and the 2 kids were sitting right beside them, the family ready to dig into the appetizing gifts. The father and children still wore their holiday pajamas, and none of them moved an inch. Instead, they just sat there, smiling, the sun stuck in a permanent state of reaching for the biggest present. Just a few feet away from them, I saw Debbie standing in a kitchen doorway, a plate of cookies in her hand, a beaming smile etched upon her pleasant face. Her pajamas were just as obnoxious and seasonal as the rest of her family's. Debbie's glazed eyes stared right at Jimmy and I, and she never once moved or said a word. Instead, the Sarandons stayed right where they were, a family forever frozen on a most joyful Christmas morning. Debbie! I cried out. I rushed toward the stoic family. Holding me back, Jimmy pulled on my arm. "Susan, please." Determined, I pulled away from him. "Debbie." My feet trudged through the snow. I could hear Jimmy right behind me, all while Frank Sinatra's Let It Snow surrounded us. "Susan!" Jimmy yelled. Panicking, I reached out towards Ben. "Hey!" I yelled. Rather than flesh, I felt cold plastic, too light to be filled by blood and muscle. Ben kneeled over and hit the snow with a quiet thud. He still hadn't moved or said a word. The smile remained plastered on his face. Horrified, I stared down at him. Ben wasn't real. He was as plastic and fake as the Santa and snowman figurines outside, just as lifeless as them too. Panicking, I knocked the Sarandon daughter over. She too fluttered to the floor, and no response ever emerged from her cheesy smile. "Oh God," I screamed. Like a plastic family display you could buy at Walmart, the Sarandons were all just big happy ornaments. Debbie continued standing in the kitchen, still with that glorious smile, and their little boy was still reaching for the huge present. All of them looked to be posing for a Life magazine Christmas snapshot. Jimmy pulled me away. "Come on, let's go," he yelled. And this time, I let him lead the way. As we careened for the entryway, I stole a look back. In methodical movements, Ben and his daughter now began to sit back in place, back to where they were when we first walked in. Only now both of their grins looked right at me. Like a strike of lightning, the Christmas tree's lights cut on with chilling quickness. A shining beacon of red and green blinded me. Sinatra's voice followed Jimmy and I all the way to the front door. In a terrified panic, we rushed outside. The cold night air felt like soothing warmth compared to the Sarandons' North Pole hideaway. We ran through the long yard. Cold breath poured from our mouths. The Sarandons' outdoor lights and figurines all cut on around us. In a frightening pattern, each decoration glowed to life as we ran right past them. But still, Jimmy and I didn't slow down, and he never let go of my arm. Not until we finally got home. Now here it is 73. All the other houses on Nature Trail are still dark, all the driveways empty except ours, and I still don't see anyone outside. Jimmy left to go to the police station about 30 minutes ago. I'm here all alone with our unborn child. At least we're finally in warmth. I've got the heater cranked up to 72. I just tried calling 911 again, but the dispatcher didn't take me serious, so now I really don't know what else to do. Then, like a radio hijacker, a Christmas song conquered my phone. The YouTube app popped up without me even clicking on it, and I saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus blared all through the house. I heard the AC cut on. Cool air swept toward me like an oncoming flood. My panic only increased as the temperature dropped. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my porch light flick on. Nervous, I peered through our living room window. A terrified scream emerged from my lips, overpowering the incessant beat. There I saw my husband standing in the front yard, Jimmy with his arms outstretched, and his smile even wider. His glazed eyes focused on me. No cold breath flowed from his lips. Out in the chilly night air, he wasn't shivering or trembling, and I knew he never would. Like the Sarandons, he'd never move at all. I'm a 17-year-old guy living in a small town near eastern Chicago. My name and details do not matter, so I'm not sharing them here. I'm not even sure if the incident that happened to me should be posted here or not, but after what happened I am totally confused and really just want answers. So let me tell you what happened. My neighbors, let's call them the Martins, living in the house next door, decided to go for a trip that would last for a couple of weeks or so, and the duty to look after their house went to my family. My parents are helpful people. so they happily took the responsibility. After the Martins left, my father would go to their house every third or fourth day and make sure everything was alright. This kept going, and sometimes my brother and I would do the work instead of him. Only when I or my brother went there, we would spend the day in the house itself, returning only before dinner. By the way, my family has 5 members. My father, my mother, my paternal grandpa, and my elder brother. After about 3 weeks, the Martins called my father via telephone and told him that they would not be back for another month or so. They apologized to my father for extending the time, and were even willing to hire a housekeeper. But my father delivered a "what are neighbors for" speech over the phone, and said he didn't have any problem. And so looking after the neighbor's house became a part of our regular life. The main incident that I want to tell you about didn't occur until the last few days before the Martins would return. That day it was my turn to look after the house. After I returned from school, I changed my clothes, had some snacks, and left for the house. After unlocking the front door, I immediately ran towards the room where the television was. Turning the TV on, I jumped on the couch. I haven't mentioned yet, but I quite enjoyed looking after the neighbor's house as they had an active Netflix subscription. I would binge watch shows on their TV until about 8 p.m., and then would check whether the doors and windows were locked or not. Then I would return home. This time too, I watched a few episodes of Supernatural. You guys should check out the Scooby Natural episode if you haven't yet already. And then proceeded to check the doors and windows. The Martins' house was not a big one, with only 4 small rooms and a couple of bathrooms. So I quickly finished the checking. I was about to go home when I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought I had kept the TV running, but then realized the whisper was coming from the guest room. I rushed to the room, only to find it empty. But the whispering was louder now. I couldn't make out what it was saying because it was shuffled. I then realized the whispers were coming from the interior of a closet in the room. A shiver ran down my spine. Well, it seemed cliché now, but at that moment I was struck in genuine terror. I was alone in the house and someone, maybe something, was whispering from the closet. I was a skeptical kid. I was sure some thief was inside the closet and was trying to frighten me away. I should have called my father and my brother, but instead I rushed to the storeroom and picked up an old baseball bat. Despite being old, it was tough enough, and I myself was a strong person. I crawled to the closet, and keeping a good enough distance, flung the door open. It was dark inside, but after my eyes adjusted, I saw it was fully empty. No clothes, no thief, no monster, no nothing. But the whispers became louder. I was still unable to recognize what was being said, but I found the voice familiar. Now I was determined to find out where the sound was coming from, so I peeped into the closet. Surprisingly enough, I saw something inside which looked like a closed window. As I peeped in closer, I saw that it was indeed a window, and was almost the size of a small door. Its surface was foggy, so I couldn't make out what was behind it. But the person who was whispering must have been behind it, as the whispers were louder now. I was still unable to point out whose voice it was, but it sounded so familiar. A new thought entered my mind. Maybe someone I knew had been kidnapped by the Martins, and was being held captive behind the window. Now that I think of it, I can't help but laugh at myself. The Martins were away for more than 3 weeks. How could this person have survived so long without food? Maybe it could happen if the Martins had provided the person with a month's amount of food. Anyway, as this thought entered my mind, I was determined to help whoever was behind the window. I flung the baseball bats and broke the window into pieces. Yes, I know, I was acting without any logic. I should have went home and brought my father, but I was excited. The fear I had felt in the beginning was replaced by excitement. Maybe I was crazy, but there is only enough logic to be processed by a 17-year-old boy. With the window now broken, I could see a dark room behind it, only lighted by the guest room's light bulb, light from which had passed through to the room. At the corner of it was a person, sitting with his hands over his face. He was trying to block the little light that had passed through the broken window. I could see that the figure was malnourished, but strangely enough, his whispering voice was quite loud. I could now make out what he was saying. He was repeatedly chanting the phrase, "Lives will be lost, hope will be not." I saw that the person was a male, but from outside of the room I was not able to recognize him. Moreover, he had his face behind his hands. So I quickly took out my phone from my pocket and switched the flashlight on, and I walked inside. The room was small. It was fully empty except for the boy sitting in the corner. "Hey," I called out, walking closer to the person. Hearing me speak, he stopped chanting. He slowly removed the hands from his face and looked up at me. Seeing his face, I jumped back. Now I realize why the voice was so familiar. The boy sitting in the corner was none other than me. Yeah, you heard that right. The boy was me, or at least he looked and sounded like me. His face looked old and shrunken, but it looked terrifyingly like mine, and there was no mistaking the ebony black hair. It was my doppelganger. When I looked at the boy who was me, he was smiling. He spoke. "I lost no hope, and here you are." I didn't understand what he was saying. I asked who he was or why he was there, but he didn't reply. He slowly pointed his finger towards his right leg. I saw that one end of a chain was attached to it, the other end of which was fixed to the wall. This time I didn't do anything in haste. In fact, I thought deeply enough. Who was this doppelganger of mine, and why was he chained up in this room? I carefully looked at the boy and noticed that below him, drawn on the floor, was a pentacle-like symbol. I looked at my doppelganger's face, and saw that he was staring at me with an expression of happiness. He again pointed at the chain. I realized that whatever or whoever my doppelganger was, he meant no harm. From now on, I will call him D. Doppelganger is too long to type. I walked out of the room and came back with the baseball bat. I signed to him to stand up and helped him stand. I then started hitting the chain. After many tries, I swung the bat with the greatest force I could gather and hit the chain, which came off the wall. The bat was broken, but D was free. He tried to say something, but his voice didn't come out. I was rather surprised by this. Some time ago, he was chanting so loudly, and now he was unable to speak. I shrugged it off and helped D walk towards the broken window. But as soon as his feet left the pentacle-like symbol, it started to shine. The very next moment, I heard a horrible scream. My body turned cold and sweat covered my face. I felt a fear I had never felt before. D's condition was worse. He was trembling. Suddenly, a figure materialized in the corner opposite of where he was standing. It was pitch black, and my phone's flashlight couldn't reveal its features. The figure looked humanoid, but taller than any human being. I was skeptical, and I still am, but at that moment I knew this thing was not human. A feeling of malevolence radiated from the figure. It just stood there where it was, and kept staring at us through bright green eyes, which was the only distinct feature of it. Luckily, it was not blocking our way to the window, so I ran towards it, dragging D along with me. But to my horror, the figure leapt at us. It was very quick and caught D's arm. I tried to free D from it, but the figure was stronger. It pulled away D from my grip and pushed him to the ground. D stopped moving and laid on the ground. This time the figure faced me. It let out a scream identical to the one I had heard before its appearance. It started walking towards me. To be honest, it was not walking. It was sliding. It was moving very slowly, not because it couldn't move faster, but to taunt me. I was not very far from the window, but the figure had shifted its position and was blocking my way. I started backing off until I reached the corner where D was chained. I saw the broken baseball bat and reached for it. Still terrified, I picked up the bat and threw it to the figure, but the bat disappeared before it could even reach it. My fear increased. I started to tremble. When the figure was right in front of me, I was greeted by a sight I still remember, one which has been haunting me in my nightmares till present day. I saw its face. At first, the blackness changed into a gruesome human face, a totally disfigured one. This was more than enough to make me scream, but the next sight was one I had never anticipated to see. It pulled its hand towards the face, and holding both sides of the head, gave a pull. The face was torn with an audible tearing sound. It then proceeded to peel away the face like peeling a banana. It opened its mouth and I expected another horrifying scream, but it didn't. It started laughing. The laugh was distorted and added to the torn face, made me greatly disturbed. I could see that underneath its torn face there was darkness. Beneath the darkness I observed hundreds of small green orbs sparkling, just like its green eyes. The figure leaned closer to my face and for the first time it spoke. What happened to my face shall soon happen to you. It whispered in a coarse voice, as distorted as its laughter. I realized that I had emptied my bladder. I realized I would soon be dead. As the figure extended its hands towards me, I waited for death to come, but it never did. Instead came D, running furiously towards the figure. All his fear was replaced with determination. At that moment, this malnourished, weaker version of me looked mightier than I would ever become. He tackled the figure and pushed it away. He then put his shoulders around the figure, holding it tight. How the malnourished D could hold back a ghastly specter was beyond my knowledge, but he was doing that, and that's what matters. Turning to me, D shouted, "You're good, run away. This thing can't go outside the room." I didn't want to run. I didn't want to leave D with the black figure after witnessing its grotesque display of tearing its own face off. But I also knew I had no other option left, so I ran towards the door. On the way, I hastily picked up my phone, the flashlight of which was still on. Then accidentally I ended up pressing the volume up button of my Windows Mobile, resuming a song that I was listening to before arriving at the house. In response to the sudden outburst of sound, I heard a horrible scream. It was similar to the earlier screams, but I could clearly make out a hint of pain in it. I looked back and saw that the figure had let D go, and was trying to get as far away from the sound as possible. Without wasting a minute, I ran to D, grabbed his hand and ran towards the window. This time, surprisingly, we were able to leave the room. The black creature didn't pursue us. It crouched at the back end of the room, covering its ears with its black hands. After we were out of the closet, I closed the door. I let out a sigh and looked at D, who was smiling. In the clear light of the guest room bulb, I could see him clearly. He really was an exact copy of me. It was like I was looking at my reflection in a mirror, only he was much thinner than me, and as I said earlier, looked malnourished. I immediately wanted to ask him about what had just happened, but I was exhausted. I wanted to keep my eyes open, but they were starting to close. It didn't feel natural. Maybe the encounter with the figure had managed to tire me supernaturally. My whole body was becoming numb. I tried to fight it, but then I felt D's hand on my shoulder. He muttered the word relax, and then I passed out. However, just before passing out, I heard D say, "Thank you, you saved me." When I woke up, I found myself lying on my bed, in my own room, in my own house. My brother was lying next to me, playing a game on his smartphone. It took me a little while to recollect the incident that occurred, but when I remembered about it, I asked my brother how I reached my room. He told me that when I didn't come back home for dinner, he and my father decided to go to the Martins' house to see if I was alright. They had even called me on my phone, but I didn't answer their calls. When they reached the house, they found me lying on the bed in the bedroom, sleeping peacefully. They then picked me up and brought me back home. I asked him if they found anyone else in the house, but he replied that I was the only one there. I immediately called my father and told him about the window in the closet, and about finding a room behind it, with a boy chained inside. I didn't tell him that he looked like me, and also skip the part about the figure. He gave me a look, by which I understood he didn't believe me. But for my convenience, he decided to check out the closet. I didn't want to go back to the room with the figure still inside, but I had to know. So I led my father and brother to the closet. If you have read enough stories like this one, you can definitely tell what happened next. Like a regular cliché story, the closet was empty, with no window inside. No window meant no room. My father said that I must have dreamt the whole incident, but I know it wasn't a dream. Everything was real, just as real as you and me. Suddenly I remembered the baseball bats I had used to break the window in the chain. Both my father and brother had seen it during their visits to the house. So I took them to the storeroom and definitely there was no baseball bat. I told them how it broke, and I left it in the room behind the closet window. I didn't mention about it disappearing when I threw it into the black figure, as it would make me sound even more stupid. But still, they were not convinced. Days went by and finally the Martins returned home. My father and brother forgot about the incident, but I couldn't. I began having nightmares about the figure and its torn face. The nightmares have still not left me, but what disturbs me more than the nightmares are some unanswered questions. Who was the boy that looked like me? Why was he chained to a wall in that room? And how was he related to that evil thing? If anyone has any similar incidents, I request you to let me know. I really want to meet D again. He managed to thank me for saving him before he disappeared, but I still have to thank him for saving me.